Hey, it's Fanuel here, your host of Questions of the Day, where I take you on my journey around the world to uncover the practice of civic science in order to understand who does what, where, when, how, and everything in between. For those returning, thank you so much for following me on this journey. And for those of you joining me for the first time, welcome aboard. So here's a question. What challenges do today's biomedical trainee scientists face? Limited exposure to the full breadth of career paths, extended training timelines, high uncertainty, hybrid competition, unstable funding, the list goes on and on. Now, you'll find these points echoed in some form in a paper after paper and report. The challenge has been that the insights are scattered, hard to find the signals, especially for those busy graduate program directors and, well, policymakers. Well, there is some new contributions to the ongoing discussion in a new open access ebook from Frontiers featuring 18 articles and 75 authors. This ebook clusters the new work into three major pillars: career transitions and outcomes, professional skill development in programs and curricula, and systemic policies and perspectives to drive change. We talked to Adriana Bankston, one of the editors, about how this collection fits into the broader ecosystem of insights and what it adds to the ongoing discussion. Some of the key takeaways for me: career outcomes data remains fragmented and needs to be more transparent. Professional skills and wellness deserve to sit at the center of training, and lasting reform requires systemic change. Now, as I said before, for program directors that are already juggling a million things, the scatter of insights makes detecting these signals in the literature daunting. This collection is a start by clustering those new signals, making them easier to find and maybe easier to act on? That's a question mark. I think the key question is what more can be done to ensure that these signals and many others aren't lost. Anyway, let's dig right in.
Previously on Questions of the Day.
Yeah, it's something we've thought really deeply about and has been an evolution. Also, kind of what we were capable of doing and measuring. So we have identified a couple of key goals for the community. And so one is, is it feeling like a community to people? Do people find the space, the events you hold, etc., welcoming, supportive, meeting their needs?
Subscribe to access that conversation and many more.
So Adriana, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me here.
So I saw your LinkedIn message about this new ebook of yours, and the first thing came to mind. I'm like, yep, she's next on my program. So here we are. I'm so excited that you said yes to this. So just take us back. Like, what was the genesis of this ebook?
Yeah, so, I've reviewed for Frontiers for a number of years for their research metrics and analytics section. And so they reached out to talk about creating something like this around research policy, which they didn't really have a whole lot of. I think it started in probably, so I guess to back that up, they do these research topics right around various areas, right, and things.
I saw that online. There's a whole bunch of them, right?
Yeah. And so I think it started in January 2024. We launched the research topic with the idea to, include practitioners who are working in career development, training, grad students and postdocs, also trainees themselves and folks who are sort of a combination, right? People who are doing training programs, running programs, trying to see if they're working or not, and also doing research. So it's, and as we'll talk about, there's three different pillars. The idea was to start something that, create something that we would have a place for them to publish this work, because there isn't like a set journal where this usually happens.
So that's a good point. So the work is dispersed quite in terms of workforce development. It's all over the place, different journals and so forth.
Right.
So is the idea then, to make sure I understand correctly, to kind of compendium of sorts, right? To bring them in one place, make it easy for people to find. Were these publications that you selected, were they already published and so you were organizing them, or brand new
I believe
papers?
they're all new. Yeah.
Brand new. Okay. Go ahead.
So I think so part of the idea was to create this one spot where this sort of work would be published, and then we would then continue with other journals, trying to sort of start a trend where other journals would publish similar collections for these folks, right?
Okay.
So there's not like a set place for this. Everyone publishes sort of mostly in research journals, but they don't have kind of a training component, right? So it worked out well. I think there's other plans down the road to do this for other journal, but since Frontiers was interested, it was a good sort of initial thing to do.
First one.
To start with this one, right?
First one's the fold. Like, we were gonna get there and get in there first. So walk us through, what was the process then of selecting these articles? I know they're divided into 3 pillars, but take us back. Like, what was the selection process?
So the call was open from January to May, I think. We got a lot of interest, right? So sort of very broad outreach to different organizations in this space, universities, trainees, practitioners, again, through different organizations. The selection really, I guess, sort of self-selected, right? So whoever was submitting, what we knew, the people in the field that are doing good work, solid research. We had, I think, at the minimum 2 reviewers for each paper.
Okay.
And so then also that obviously limited what was getting accepted or not. We wanted to include, obviously, actually for the ebook, you needed a minimum number of articles.
Which is?
I think 10 or
okay.
so, yeah. And so then Frontiers, would create this whole thing where it's all nicely packaged into something. So then, and some of their most popular topics have ebooks. So the idea was to include sort of most of this work. We ended up with 18 articles, 75 authors. We wanted, a good variety of topics, and also including multiple institutions, right? So it's pretty broad as far as distribution, East Coast, West Coast, in between, different career stages, different types of programs, so undergrad, grad, postdoc. Including, as I said, both career development professionals and researchers who are doing this work.
It's funny that even this this compilation itself is worthwhile to study in terms of, I was just mentioning all the graphs you could do in terms of the institutions that were represented, the authors, and the topics, right? But go ahead, sorry.
So I think, in terms of specifics, a lot of these folks are training, right, the next generation. So looking at what programs are working, what are best practices, how they can learn from each other from different institutions, and then they go to, conferences to present this work.
Right.
Some of the things, other things that are in the context of what's happening, right? Funding structures, policy, inputs, how we're training the workforce, what's working and what's not in terms of programs, but also how these federal policy changes are impacting academia and the training environment and where trainees are going, making
it relevant, right?
And also making these folks, aware of what's happening at the national level, right? Because I think that's a bit of the disconnect there. That they're sort of viewing programs, are they working? Are they actually getting, their students to different places?
Right.
But also, how does this kind of go in the context of, the political landscape, the election, or everything that happened, which was not obviously anticipated, but did play a role in terms of the final message, right? How we wrote things in the end.
In thinking through the pillars now, let's get a little bit into that. Transparency, the first pillar, right? You have career outcomes, transparency being one. Before we get into it, I want to zoom out a little bit. What do you see? Because that's a challenge, right? You have programs that are doing various programs, right? These are graduate programs doing various professional development programs. And some are tracking sort of what the impact is. Some are not. We don't know, right? If you look at the Coalition of Graduate Schools, right? That's a really great. They have a dashboard in there. I tried to get in. I couldn't get in. I don't know if you have access to it. But I'm assuming these institutions in there have agreed to share the data, right? In a kind of a centralized portal as well. And there's notable ones that are not in there, by the way. In the coalition. So talk about transparency. We need more of it. It sounds like this is one of your key messages, right? talk about the pillars in light of that.
Yeah, so I think first pillar, I guess I'll go through kind of
Yeah.
the concept, right? So I think it was sort of backwards. We wanted to see what was coming in and then we grouped them, right? And said like where do they fit in? Starting with pillar 1, because trying to cover this disconnect between training and the workforce, right?
Yeah.
So how are these universities really training folks for where they're going after? So that's the first. And then also second one is more about skill development.
I saw that.
Like, right? So folks that are thinking more about what kind of skills they're training, also wellness and a bit of systemic change, which is mostly in the third, which is sort of like what kind of reforms we want to see. Again, how are these policies, need to change, right? How is, what's happening federally impacting institutions?
Right.
And then sort of a bit of, folks that do really in-depth research did look at what's working, what's not working, what kind of data should be collected, right? Are these programs working, that sort of thing, right? So you get really into the weeds of that too. But again, I think the policy is a big component of that too. And, what do we want to see as far as policy changes in institutions, but then also, right, how are, trainees being impacted by the current landscape and all the funding cuts and everything, right? So that bigger landscape, which I think we didn't really anticipate when we started, right? It was sort of like, okay, this collection needs to exist. We're creating the first one. But then when all these things are happening, we said, okay, how do we now integrate that into this? And so we ended up having some policy papers, research funding discussions, and some publications that were getting more at some of the systemic changes too.
And I think the first pillar was the smallest. You had three papers in there. But how many applications did you have for that pillar? Does that indicate that the interest there was lower than others, like some submission, or just your selectivity?
Hard to know. I think a lot of people are thinking about reforms, so the other two maybe have more sort of, how do we change things? And, since this has gone on for multiple months, including during the election or after, right? So I think that, maybe things that were initially interesting became more in the context of what's going on.
Right.
I think also just whoever's in the field, there's, folks covering different types of research and programs, right, for these different things. And that's also a hard question to answer, right? How we're preparing trainees for the workforce and what's really working there that is traditionally disconnected in the field, I think. So maybe there may be like fewer folks in that space.
Right.
But yeah, it's hard to know. We would get a lot of interest. And, like I said, selected articles based on kind of who we knew and what they were doing, and also the reviewers, so it's very thoroughly vetted as far as even reviewers are in the field and people that know, what should be published.
What's going on, So I think that's useful to know, right?
Yeah.
Kind of the context, because sometimes you see these things, you're like, oh, here it is, and it's publicly available, by the way, open access.
Open access,
Right? Very important. It's not behind some paywall. Now, I would like to get into some of the key takeaways from this ebook, right? You hope people read it, right? I mean, let's be honest, right? You hope people read it, but the reality is people are extremely busy, and some may not read it. And the operative word there, some may not read it, right? Not that most will not read it, but some may not read it. With that in mind, Adriana, how do you advise people to access this compendium, this ebook? And what are some key signals should they be paying attention to?
To finish this. So I think, one of the things that we're looking at, and this obviously has evolved over time with the landscape, is, diversity in science. Obviously, read the things you're interested in, right? But they're broad enough that I think they cover kind of general themes in science, right? And things that people think about. So, right. This is something that, some of the folks who published are really doing a lot of this research, how we're making the workforce more diverse, how is funding distributed to different institutions and PIs, and who is really not funded. One thing is, I think in the context of this space too, that we should think about because this was somewhat of a surprise that, okay, this research is out there, but then how do we integrate it into the current ecosystem of what's going on, right? So I think that what the other thing I want people to know is, preparing these folks more to connect to the federal landscape of like what's going on, because it's sort of like we're doing our programs. Okay, are they working? Like, where are we sending our students?
Yeah.
But then also, are you aware of what's happening in DC, right? All of that. So that's something that we try to integrate in this, to where policies need to change. These folks need to be aware of what's going on and how it's impacting their universities, right? Which I think came out of this organically, not originally. And then I think, the issue of diversity also, there's still the issue of folks aren't seeing themselves in science,
Right.
Compounded with the fact that all these grants were getting cut and people are leaving science, right? So I think that we really try to also make that point of science is still a place for people to be in. We need people from different backgrounds, that make good research themes. And then the rest is sort of like in the weeds of programs that work and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
Which
So let's get into those weeds.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like those weeds, and I wish we could talk for much longer, right? Because there's so much in here. I think the goal today was really to set the stage, right, for this book, and begin to take it apart over time, right, with other authors as well. Now, before getting too deep, the audience, you kept talking about folk. Who's the targeted audience for this work?
Yeah. So I think, we wanted to, like I said, create and this is something that obviously has evolved over time, that we started, right, with this idea of, we want to create the first sort of ebook like this.
Check.
To help, practitioners learn from each other, right? Who are people who are in, university administration doing career development, thinking through university leadership that need to know. And of course, they're showcasing the work that they're doing there. So it's also highlighting, good things coming from universities. But then that, and I think, it's a fairly large community, right? We want to learn from each other. They're able to, read each other's papers, and then hopefully, I'm assuming they'll be presenting this at different meetings in the future. So creating, right, this forum of, like you said, opening this data, it's more transparent. We know what's happening,
right?
Student data, that sort of thing. But then also, I think, how do we think about, right, going from our online PDF into policy change, right? What does that mean? Which is sort of like pillar 3, right?
Right.
Reforms we want to see. How do we reach policymakers, right? So we presented recently at WMC, great meeting. It's just another project that I'm part of, but really what's apparent is that some of this data needs to get out to, decision makers who can use it to really improve.
So there's a gap there as well, right? Which we know the research to practice, right, within the professional development sort of ecosystem, right? So just to make sure the audiences are program developers, right, at universities who are running these PhD programs, for example. Policymakers, you hope as well, if they're opening this as well. But you're talking about also having this translated, right? So that policymakers understand where are the levers, right? The data itself, what is it telling you? And then where are the levers, right? So now I want to go back to transparency again. So why is that then? Why don't we have enough access to more data, right, about where trainees are going? Because that would give you a really good high resolution into what more needs to be done. Because in the first pillar, right, this promising academy, right, Promise Academy, I believe that was the analysis. It reminded me of my own program that I participated in at Stanford called DARE, Diversifying Academia Research Excellence, which did the same thing. We were going into universities, other universities, right, outside Stanford, to see what is it like out there, right, to learn from the faculty members, and had mentors. I thought it was a wonderful case study, right? We need more such analysis and more data, right? But why don't we have more of that, right? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think, well, I guess, I guess I'll point out, sort of 3 maybe practical things from that pillar, right? So one is visualizing career outcomes is variable, right, across the board. Like you said, there's coalition for, I forget which one it is. One of the coalitions that try to gather data for multiple institutions. At some point, we try to aggregate all that, and it's just very different ways of distributing it.
That's
Right?
CGS, right? The Coalition of Graduate Schools, I believe, also is compiling.
CNG.
And there's another one. So it's worth pausing here because we were talking about two different databases. One of them is the Coalition for the Next Generation of Life Science, and another one is from the Council of Graduate Schools. The links are in the description. There's a multiple. Basically, the point here, there's quite a few.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So the data is out there. It's not uniform, right? It also comes from multiple departments, right? And so you're, may not be representing all the postdocs, for example, right, at that school. Right. Like, where is it coming from?
And the NIH has them too, right? Through its training program.
And that too, yeah. So I think there's probably, some reasons why universities don't always release everything, or obviously it's aggregated, de-identified. But there's not this, uniform way of presenting this across the board, right? The other things from there, as you mentioned, like structured exposure to training. So this is something that we're also kind of hammering on, get people into the field early, even undergrads, and try to kind of, get them interested. The other interesting thing was the third paper from here is that faculty job offers and what influences that, as far as, who's applying. Again, like the diversity comes into that space as well. And who are we really funding, right? Because if we're not funding those folks, students won't see themselves in those roles, right? And all of that too. So those are, three key takeaways, right? A visualization of career outcomes, structured training, and then also faculty funding.
Yeah, and it's patchy, right? In terms of the visualization aspect of this. I'm thinking of UCSF has a great visual of where their trainees are going. But yeah, I think, this piece, and tell me if I'm wrong, the ebook as well is agnostic to any one particular career, right? You're talking about just the diversity of careers to support the biomedical workforce, right? And in fact, if you look at the NIH C32, the most recent one actually, right, given all the changes, it still says that, right, to support the diversity of careers, to support the biomedical research workforce, right? So is that true? So you were agnostic to any one particular area, right?
Yeah, so I mean, very broad, again, kind of waiting to see, what was going to come in. Because these are really the people doing the work. We're just trying to create a platform for them to showcase this work. So it's fairly broad as far as biomedical research. A few things in there. I think a bit of social science. Again, a lot of this came back to how the federal policy landscape is impacting training, and then I think most of the papers ended up having some sort of policy there, and we try to bring it all together in the editorial too, and try to put this into context, into what's happening. And then I think we didn't talk about civic science, but I think that's also part of how are we training researchers of tomorrow to use their knowledge in society. This disconnect between training and workforce, and also the policy as being something that needs to change in institutions, but then also again is having an impact from the federal side, right?
Yeah. So my earlier question was gently easing us into civic science a little bit, being agnostic, but to say also tracking, right? If you have better data, right, transparency, you'll be able to really have high resolution in terms of where trainees are going and where the sort of the blocking challenges are in the pipeline or ecosystem. Pipeline is not a good word. But in the ecosystem where the blockades are, so that we can help, release them, right, for trainees. You mentioned policy. So with respect to policy, what are some things that surprised you from what the papers that you end up accepting and publishing?
Yeah, I think it's something, I guess we were very focused on the pure research, right? So, what's happening, and it's nice to see this, right? We need more data out there.
So more data.
But it's very dispersed, right?
Okay.
But, I think the collection does a good job highlighting kind of some of the major programs that exist. And then I think, in terms of policy, I think that in talking to the authors, it seemed like, again, coming back to this, like not a lot of awareness to what's happening federally, how it's going to really impact what they're trying to do. And, they're sort of trying to grapple with that at the same time, right? So they submitted the paper, then they said, the grant that was in there, got cut or something happened. We need to modify this, right? So this is very real time, right? As far as like the program is what it is, but then there's other things related to the publication. Like, can we say DEI? There's certain words, right? When all this stuff is going on, can we still say the things we were planning to say when this got submitted? Can we mention, this grant, which may not exist anymore, all of that. So this is interestingly not planned, right? Just because of what was going on federally, that the things that were submitted had to be modified. And also the editorial, like, how do we sort of still keep this message, right? That we want diverse researchers without getting in trouble and saying things that, are going to go back to the administration. So I think there was a bit of apprehension, like, how do we, message this in a way that is not going to get universities in trouble and folks doing the work, that we're really trying to celebrate this and what they're doing, right?
Yeah, because your target audiences, of course, they are more increasingly aware of what's happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they are going to look at some of the recommendations in this ebook and some of the sort of what's going on, right?
Yeah.
In that light, to say, okay, what can we actually realistically do, right? So if I'm writing, for example, I'm thinking of a program director writing a T32, right, grant, they should look at your ebook, first of all, right?
Yeah.
Because as you're writing their proposal, but how should they, they have to think about what the federal landscape is doing, what's accepted, what isn't. Even the NIH T32 RFP, just updated, so you have to be sort of in the know on that. But I think the challenge is for them as well is to sort of balance that, right, with the direct needs of the program, right? We need funding, we need to fund these spots, these students that are coming in, get them from 0 year to hopefully 5 and out, right? How do we do that?
And then I think you also have, just everything, trainees are dealing with in the current situation.
And
right?
that as well.
The program exists,
right?
But then, new elements came up, I'm sure, how do you feel about, the current situation? Do you want to stay in science, that sort of thing, right? So, I mean, we don't probably fully appreciate all of that yet, but, I sympathize with them and, all the things that they're dealing with. So I think that's also maybe a good reason to say, like, we need this work to be out there so that we can see, how trainees are impacted by all this, right? And make that more open.
And learning from each other, right? I can say, hey, what are you doing, right? Given these limited dollars, what innovations are you deploying, right? The Promise Academy is one example, right? Of how, hey, how could I deploy this in my university, right? For my postdocs. The DARE program at Stanford, for example, as well. I think that's part of your message, right? That let's learn more from each other, but we need to share data.
Yeah, and I think that is, there's some really good programs showcased there, right? They were pretty good as far as showcasing what's working, what's not, what they plan to do. Some of them are small pilots that are going to expand. Others are programs that have existed for multiple years that are doing well. It's a good example to look at, right? So I think, there's a lot of data in there to read.
Yeah, it's too much. So program directors should absolutely read this, right? As a team, right? Team effort to look at the different components. I want to zoom out a little bit. Let's assume for a second these recommendations, and also you're saying this is the first one.
Yeah.
You hope that there'll be others because there's way more literature out there, of course, right? Published in different aspects. What you're trying to do is let's create a home for it and make it easy for people to find, right? First level, easiest one, and then how to implement that is a different question.
Right.
But let's zoom out. Let's say we have the transparency, we have the policies that enable, right, for graduate programs to really be what we want them to be. Take us to that future. What does that look like?
Yeah, I think we sort of talked about this, right? So I think even now in this current space, trainees are not thinking about science as being their main career, right? If we don't create a system where, diverse scientists can thrive and do well, right? So some of that goes back to university, reforms and policies. How do we treat them well? How do we pay them better and all of that? Right. But I think, right, so policymakers, a lot of this comes back to that too, that people who are in power and can make change are aware that these things exist, and obviously they won't read the whole book, but I would envision, right, phase 2 being like, they would go to their member of Congress and say like, okay, this is what our students are dealing with, like here's some data, and then use that to try to make change.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, that a lot of those insights are already out there, right? And you talk about this too, the best programs, right? The formerly best programs from the NIH actually, right? There's a publication out there about what they learned, right, from all those programs that they funded too, right? It's freely available, right? So part of this challenge from I'm seeing, you tell me what you think, is that we have this challenge of how do we dissect this information, decode it, and make it a sort of actionable, right, for those who are able to make those decisions, right? Policymakers, program directors, and you are adding to that, right? And so in that sphere, how do you see this now adding to that conversation? Because there's a lot that these program directors have to suss out, right? You do agree, right? There's a lot in there. How do you see yours fitting into that jigsaw puzzle? This body of work now, and the trajectory you're setting, because there'll be another set of collections later on, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about, trying to show what this data looks like. I think so. There's so much in this ebook, right? So it's hard to cover, but things that relate to specific populations, right? So undergrad, grad student, postdoc,
right?
What those folks are dealing with, right? How do we? I think part of the making this work better is knowing what's working and what's not, which hasn't always been out there, right? So I think like we made that more open and available. And again, this diversity, is a big issue, because we've seen, trainees from certain backgrounds feeling more impacted and all that. So, but I think, coming back to what we talked about before, is there's still a disconnect between, I think, what's happening in universities and how change can be made from there, right? Because this data is out there. How do we now get it out to a member of Congress, right, who can do something? Whether it's like your local member, like going to, Congress in DC to do this, because that's something, off topic here, but like having spent the last year in Congress is also that, we staff do like to hear from students and, bringing all of this real world stuff, what's happening, because they're, dealing with so many things, they're fairly disconnected from the day-to-day. But when they have, a grad student coming to their office from the district saying, we're really struggling with all the federal things, here's what's happening, this is where I just could plug into and say, well, we actually have some data from our school showing, what our students are dealing with, can we help, include this in some of your projects, like a letter, a bill, other things that Congress can be doing, right?
Yeah. I think, the piece for me, what really resonates, going back to the beginning, and I wish we could keep on talking, right? We're sadly coming to a close here, is that, we have all this information out there, be more transparent, more program sharing data, right? About where the trainees are going, for example, right? What programs, you mentioned it, right? What's working and what isn't, because what isn't, that tells you, right? Okay, maybe don't try to replicate this one-to-one somewhere else, right? Because we've tried it. But even if it's working here, it doesn't mean it's going to work elsewhere, but it gives you some inkling that maybe look at it and still decide how to deploy it, right? In your own populace, if you will. So as we come to a close, and bummed about that. We're here talking in DC, actually, for those who are listening in. For those who now are going to say, okay, I'm going to read this, and you start at the beginning, follow your interests, right, in terms of accessing the ebook, because it's quite a lot. For others, what advice do you have for others as they read this, and others in this other bodies of work in this space? What's your advice more generally? And imagine actually, these are program directors that are now listening. Where are the signals should they be paying attention to, especially now?
I think listening to your, trainees and students, right? Because it's, some of this is far removed, and it's sort of like, okay, this thing that exists online, right? Making that more real. in terms of like, talk to people that are impacted by this.
Yeah.
Depending on the role they're in, like what they can do with that.
Yeah.
But don't just let it be a PDF online, right? So like, how are
Worst
we
thing
going
you
to
can
use
do.
this to do something with? Yeah.
You know what I've been thinking about, right? Like journal clubs,
Yeah.
right? Make this part of your
Yeah.
journal club for students. Most PhD programs have a thing like that. That's an easy, low-hanging fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Where students, I imagine students will be very eager to have this as part of it too, right?
Yeah, and I think, going back to this disconnect, right? So where these conferences are happening, so you could envision, inviting like a congressional staffer and saying, come and hear this,
Right.
listen to this publication and like data from your school and your district, right? So
Right.
I think that, does exist. It's not fully out there. Can be repackaged in other ways, right? That is more accessible to different audiences that are not necessarily academics.
Because we need to get it out, right? Even beyond our confines.
Right.
This is very niche for us that we care about this, but
Yeah.
we should get it out to the general public as well, right? They should be aware of what's going on with that as well. Adriana, this was a lot of fun. I feel like we were on the surface still, but it's enough now to get people reading and talking about these things even more, right? To come up and sharing, right, insights from their own programs about what's working and what isn't. If they forgot everything we talked about, I feel like that is the most important thing here. It's like sharing is important.
Yeah.
And that's how we move forward. Adriana, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Fanuel.